Ireland has this moment of time to change things. It can be this very revelatory change that sets an example for the rest of the world.
Well, what's the crack? This is Peter Ryan. He's an academic and former head of research at CoinDesk. He is a crypto insider. But in 2019, he famously announced that he was leaving crypto because he no longer believed that the technology could deliver on its key principles and philosophies. He turned his back on crypto and instead is now focusing on improving existing political and economic structures around the world with a focus on Ireland. Last week, himself and Angela Nagle, who I also hope to interview, released this 10-point plan on the future of Ireland's economy. In this interview, we discuss a wide range of topics, so please check out the timestamps below to skip to the sections you are most interested in.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's great to talk more about these ideas. And to dive into my bio a little bit, I got started living in New York. I was around their kind of tech and venture capital scene as I was coming up in my career. I kind of made a niche out of crypto and Bitcoin and everything that was emerging. One of the first epicenters of crypto was New York, which few people don't know about. There was a bit license, which is the New York specific regulation that basically put the kibosh on every business that was operating crypto back in sort of like the 2015 era. And everyone sort of scattered to the wind a little bit to other places. But when in that kind of crucial early period, there was something called the Bitcoin Center, and it was like down right next to Wall Street. And I happened to intern there as sort of my first expose into understanding what this wild world is. And I was very much an advocate and into the whole marketing pitch.
What year was that?
That was back around 2014. I worked as an analyst in sort of the VC capacity, working within startups as sort of a data guy, as sort of like looking at things, how do they work operationally. And so I then found an opportunity at CoinDesk to basically have a leading role in developing their research unit, which was to supplement, they have their core journalistic activities, which do great work. And then I was going to sort of have this independent organization within it to create more business investor focused, sort of advanced level, high quality stuff. And that would also help inform the journalist staff. We also made some cool software tools along the way and other interesting projects. But yeah, it was a great deep dive into sort of how everything worked and gave me tons of in-depth and close touch knowledge of how cryptocurrency as an industry functions.
Would it be right in calling you a bit of an insider at crypto? You were really there early on. You were at the coalface in CoinDesk, and some high-profile people within the crypto community follow you. You have this voice within crypto, but then you left, and I've read your leaving statement, and not many people have done that. So that's one of the things that I'm more interested in, is like why you left and where, what was your reasoning?
Yeah, so I made crypto so much of my personality, my identity. I was, I had my hands in a lot of different, communities, like looking at what's going on in ETH, what's going on in this one, that one. And then I eventually left CoinDesk to pursue sort of a startup project called CoinSpice that was sort of more in sort of the building. It was a media company, but there was a lot of building that we were doing within sort of the decentralized space. And I kept going deeper and deeper in and kept getting more and more involved in sort of, consensus making, knowledge sharing among developers, among, directions of how the, open source software is going to, eventually edit itself and what updates should be done. And so I kept going in, I kept looking at the economics of how it all works. I mean, that's where I really find my niche of being sort of the economist of crypto. And I got to a point where I knew enough people, I knew enough, how things really work, and studied the sort of theory of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, what's the short term, what's the long term. And I couldn't keep it sort of consistent in my head anymore. And I had to say, it's cool, it's exciting. There's going to be a lot of positive externality that comes from the space and the people in it. But the ultimate crypto ideology, the crypto theory,
Yeah.
it's wrong, and it's not going to work. And so that's where I did this sort of I'm leaving crypto article, because, like I said, it's like, yeah, there's sort of a formal company that I may work for here and there, but you're part of this community, and like, you're really like a member of this tribe. So that was my kind of
Yeah.
establishment of I am no longer a crypto acolyte. I
Yeah.
no longer promote it, and now I'm a skeptic.
The time, what interests me was when you joined and left. I tried to think of who else has left crypto and done something similar, and I come to the conclusion of Stripe, the Collison brothers, Irish company.
Yeah.
They were on board with crypto, like they're hackers, the Collison brothers. People, I actually want to tell the story of them more because it's not played out more. These guys are proper nerds, hackers that they were on board with Bitcoin from day one. And then they left in around 2018, 2019. They're like, this Bitcoin stuff isn't going to work. And now just last year, they've announced that they're back. So I put it to you, did when you left, have things changed maybe that you could come back, or not enough?
Yeah, so the Collison brothers are interesting because they were one of the first to like look into, hey, how do we early on bring crypto and Bitcoin into what we do with Stripe? And there was an obvious overlap with what their overall mission is, economic infrastructure of the global internet, and what cryptocurrencies, what the idea was supposed to be. They did a big statement. You can find their blog post all the way back. I forget the year, but it was like, give or take 5. And they said, look, here are the reasons why, Bitcoin right now doesn't work for us. We thought it could, it doesn't. So we're like, removing it from any update that we were going to do or any sort of integration. So they were an interesting case study of people that were into it, obviously people that are like really in the know, really connected, and that went the other direction. I think, they've circled back around, and they've probably come along the way of sort of more of the DeFi wave, Ethereum wave that's been mutating. But I would say, yeah, I did this one day. I kind of analyzed like who are the other skeptics and who's sort of, was an advocate and then turned skeptic. And without tooting my horn too much, I think there's no one that was as much an insider and like promoter of crypto that has since turned as skeptical as I have.
Okay, yeah.
I hold that title, I think.
Yeah, and so let's just talk about the skeptics a bit more, because I read your some of your reasoning, and a lot of it has got to do with inflated prices, mania, bad money flushing in, things like that. Not so much the tech behind it, even though it's probably it is all experimental. So yeah, tell us, just bullet point, what were the main things that you're still critical of?
Yeah, I think what really started to bother me, and this sort of then cascades into everything else, is that we're sold this myth that crypto, that Bitcoin, it's decentralized. There's no leaders. It's all it's math. It's like digital gold. They're made up of atoms. You can't inflate it. It's this perfect creation that was given to us from like another world. Like it's not have any human flaw that's touching it. And the more I got into the industry, the more I saw how there's like a dozen guys in a back room doing stuff to make this happen. So like that's not true. It's not like this thing comes out of nothing. You can go to, let's say, Bitcoin. You can go to Bitcoin's website. You can go to their GitHub repository. You can find the top developers that are contributing code to it. There's about a dozen that are the majority contributors to the Bitcoin code. So you have a dozen people that are, they're not just developers. They're not just like doing plumbing. Like the code is the monetary policy. So like they're is a dozen people directly altering and managing the monetary policy of Bitcoin. So the more and more I got to understand how that works and what the process is, how it's gate kept, because anyone can't just jump in there. You can copy the Bitcoin code, you can edit it yourself, you can put it out there, but good luck trying to sort of sell that and sort of say, oh, well, this is the new Bitcoin. Like, that's not how it works. What happens is these guys have a monopoly on the GitHub repo. They control what edits get into the main code. And then that main code is also attached to a ticker that exists on an exchange. So then you have this other total thing, and this is what I think Satoshi completely missed the boat on. Even though I hold various views on Satoshi, good and bad. I think I ultimately respect him and what he was trying to do, but I think he just could not see the fact that exchanges grew around Bitcoin, and now these exchanges are bottlenecks. And so it's like, okay, how many major exchanges are there? 5, maybe 10 if we're being generous. And whatever they decide in terms of ticker, in terms of what you can buy and sell into within their exchange as the user base, that is the market deciding, that is what code gets passed. If you're a Bitcoin code update that's not satisfying the 5 to 10 exchange CEOs, well, then they can delist you and they can put the other version they like into that spot. So again, what you have is a dozen of software developers managing the monetary policy, and you have about a dozen exchange CEOs managing how the market actually interfaces with the decentralized, the market chooses consensus Bitcoin. And the miners are really at the end of that food chain, because they're buying electricity like every week, every month. Yeah. They're exchanging to fiat all the time. They don't care about the long term really. And so they're at the whim of what these exchanges and devs do. And that's the real story of how crypto works. It's a hierarchy. There's monopolies, and it does not emulate what the grand vision was at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. So like, there's a lot there. Like, I'll cut to it. Like, Bitcoin, like the way I like to describe Bitcoin is it was, the first ever mobile phone that came out that was that size. Okay. It did the job for then, but then there was advancements. And I think you actually write about this when you go back and analyze, Satoshi's messages and the block size and think, the way you interpret it was very tense back then. And it could have gone either way, and it could have gone the way of updating the big brick phone, and eventually it would have been an iPhone, but it didn't. So they shot themselves in the foot back then. So let's cast Bitcoin aside. Now we've got Ethereum. It's an advancement. Let's say we're on a Motorola phone, and then there'll be something else, maybe Solana, maybe Enton. So where do you stand on these advancements that don't claim to be the ultimate decentralized thing? They claim to be a product, but that run on these, better rails for settling things.
Yeah. So the funny story about Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, is that because of this very issue of this inability to properly update Bitcoin's code back in the day, he was basically, I don't want to say ostracized, it was voluntary. He kind of faded away from contributing to the Bitcoin community and created his own project, Ethereum. And everything about Ethereum is descended from that critical moment where you can't do it on Bitcoin, you have to go over and do it over here. Yeah. The problem that I see, and there's the term Bitcoin maximalist within these spaces. I would say I'm not at all one of those, but I think we cannot ignore these, the centrality in terms of like how cryptocurrency theory comes together. Like, proof of work is what makes it happen. Like that is such of a crux of it all. And when I start to see Ethereum start to move away into proof of stake, into all these sort of convoluted further updates like roll-ups, and like I still I don't follow as much, but I still keep tabs.
Yeah.
And what I see is ultimately they're trying to logically outsmart the system that already worked and was, in a way, sort of, you don't fix something that's not broken. And the reason they're trying to fix that is because Ethereum is also this, global computer where everyone's running smart contracts and other programs within this blockchain. So there was ways to do smart contracts and other things on Bitcoin that was in a slightly different way than how Ethereum does it. If you Google counterparty, for instance, in the history of counterparty, you'll be able to find how smart contracts could have been done on Bitcoin in a different type of way.
Yeah, well, the whole thing was like, I've done some looking into this as Bitcoin is UTXO and Ethereum is account based, and they're the fundamental differences. And then there are some people that have continued looking at UTXO, and that's one of the fundamental layers, I think. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So I mean, there's these nuances once you start to get into it, where it's like, what creates bottlenecks, and like the huge thing on ETH is that gas fees get blown up out of proportion. We first saw this before NFTs, before everything else. There was CryptoKitties, and this was happening, and we saw it clogging the chain. Gas fees were going through the roof, and it was like the first indication that proof of work on Ethereum doesn't make sense for what Ethereum's trying to do in the way that it's trying to do it. Yeah. And so then Vitalik and the rest of them had to start figuring out, well, how do we move away from proof of work? How do we create like duct tape on duct tape solution to make this work? And the more I look into it, the more, it's novel ideas. It's not like it's not intelligent. The point of the matter is you can't get away from sort of the economic systems that are in place here. And ultimately, how you make ETH work is you create an oligarchic structure where you have, and that's what proof of stake basically is, you have the people with the most tokens deciding how consensus arrives at itself or how transactions get through. Yeah. That's the only way to do it. And, that's not to say, and this is the thing, it's like, that's not exactly the worst case scenario if you acknowledge it. I mean, that's what companies are. When you drink Coca-Cola, they're a centralized entity.
That's also what Bitcoin mining turned into with, ASIC miners and things like that. So like eventually capitalism wins. They find a way to make to take over and dominate whatever these you can be as decentralized as you want maybe, and eventually it will just find a way. So I don't want to keep going. We've a lot to talk about, I think. But so would it be fair? And I agree with this. This is what I would think is that, crypto is an experiment, and it is Ethereum is a giant experiment. It's got this roadmap. When you look at all the layer ones, the top of them, like Solana goes off network every day or every week, whatever. Cardano are taking ages to build out. Algorand haven't launched, and they're top scientists. Polkadot hasn't launched. So, there was a big explosion in price and things last year, but now everyone was sold a promise. But the promise is actually the reality that these things are going to take a couple more years before they're ready, before we get the iPhone. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's a certain where I reject all of Bitcoin theory, and that's where we can start to move on into the larger economic conversation. Yeah. But I respect what that unique Bitcoin attempt was, and that's where I said proof of work is so important, because even though you might have hierarchy and you might have big players emerging within the Bitcoin space concerning, let's say, miners specifically, because they're the ones contributing hash rate, aka the work, into the system to process transactions. The entire point of proof of work is that through the dynamic adjustment system, and there would be this constant incentive structure in place that would mean you have to keep spending more and more and more to basically corrupt the system. And so through that very concise and simple mechanism, you had this ability to say, yeah, it might go in a certain direction, but this is our mitigation against that. The proof of work is what stops sterile oligarchy forming, which you can't really stop that in proof of stake. Wealth begets more wealth.
Mm.
And then, yeah, you could say, well, more wealth can buy more miners, which then equals more hash rate. True, but if someone has an ingenious idea to make a better technology in the mining space, they could blow the competition away. And
Yeah.
that's sort of the point. And you have to then be an operator. How are you managing your mining system? Air conditioning is a big thing in mine, or in like location. Some guys do it in Iceland. Some guys do it in Texas. I don't think that's a great idea. It's hot. So there's all these things that go into it that harken on sort of the entrepreneurial factor within sort of when you're thinking an economic mindset. And so that's where I respect that this was the solution. It might not have been perfect. Maybe in the end it might have been wrong, but like it was logically coherent, and it was then supposed to keep increasing. I'll wrap it up into a payment system where you and me can transact effortlessly, something that akin to Stripe's probably trying to do through their own centralized manner. And that's how it was going to work. This idea that it's going to be a settlement layer, there's going to be other layers like Lightning Network and other things that are on top. It completely destroys what that mechanism was.
Yeah. And the way, one other point is that, we talk about decentralization, or, you're not that decentralized, but people in some countries, they don't give a shit about how decentralized it is. It's just better than their current system. So I think Binance Smart Chain is the biggest in Argentina because Argentina's currency and economy is fucked. So like what is perfect and then what actually is a market fit as well are two things. Will people go for it? And they will. But yeah, I get your point. So you left Coinbase anyway with this letter, this public letter. CoinDesk, sorry. And so now this brings on to the really interesting part. Tell us where you went next.
Yeah, so I was a little bit adrift. As I said, I created an entire identity around being like a crypto person, and now I rejected all of that. So it was sort of what do I do
Who
now?
am I?
Yeah, it was. So it was interesting. So through, I took some time off, relaxed, and then I came to the position, hey, I should go back to grad school because, I'm really interested in these ideas, and that's the entire reason I got into crypto, was because I cared about there's obviously rot in the world. Bitcoin got that right. There's a problem in the financial system. There's a problem with economics in general. Everyone smells the stink. Yeah. So I wanted to continue my journey on discovering really what is that? How do we solve this? How do we figure it out? So I decided, history was going to be the best lens to view that through. So I focused on doing a history over an economics degree. So studying the history of economics. And I decided to go to University College Dublin. The program made sense to me. I wanted to go to Ireland. I'm Irish American. There's some connections going on there. And I really enjoyed what they had to offer in terms of studies and classes, because what became one of my questions was, okay, crypto's all about a financial revolution. What happens immediately before the revolution, during the revolution, and after the revolution? How does money fit into that?
Yeah.
And so I said, why don't I just study a bunch of revolutions around the world and figure out what money was doing through all of those things, especially with sort of the dissident and the revolutionary communities of okay, if you're like the Irish revolutionaries, how are you getting money to buy guns? How does that work? So that was my initial topic of interest, of just figuring out, how did they transact? How did a totally alternative monetary system emerge, and transaction system, to facilitate this? Because that's what Bitcoin and crypto is basically trying to do right now.
Yeah.
And then the more and more I got into it, the more that I discovered sort of this interesting episode with foreign credit, and the emerging Irish Free State, and then the entire doctrine that the Irish revolutionaries, in sort of the 1916, 1922 period, were advocating, and that became this jolt of lightning that exploded a whole new way of looking at economics and what they were sourcing from and what they wanted, how Ireland developed, previously before that, and then into the next 100 years leading up to today. And it was sort of an amazing, eye-opening experience to really get to this feeling that this is the real solution to that thing I thought Bitcoin could solve.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, what was the name of the course in UCD? The title?
Yeah. So my program is called Global History.
Global History, yeah.
In the history department, and then some of the classes I took, like one was called Global Revolutions. So literally, like over like a 200 span history, sort of ending with the Irish, like it stops around 1930, but from like 1848 to 1930, we basically studied like around the world.
Okay.
Iranians, they did a revolution in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
The Chinese did one. The Cubans did one. The Russians did one in 1905, even before the big communist one. And those two were kind of different in a lot of ways. So there was I just sort of got a really good perspective on how change happens. Like, how do you go from like a political change for sure, but then an economic change?
Yeah.
And like, what are the ideas that are fueling that to really get a startup nation going?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing that you've done. I just generally curious about your time in Dublin. Where did you live? How long were you here for? 2 years?
Yeah, well, I loved, my four walls in my studio apartment. That was during the COVID lockdown.
Oh, you were here during COVID?
Yeah, so I got to Dublin right before the big, COVID Iron Curtain fell on closing everything. And it was, it'll be a few weeks. And then.
Oh, feck.
Yeah.
And so what were you doing? You're just stuck at home. Like what part of Dublin were you in?
I was right by, what is that place called? The big stadium.
Yeah, I can see it from my window.
Yeah, like I was north of the river of where all the tech companies are.
Yeah, I can see Google from my other window. So we'll get to all that in a second. But just did you like Ireland? Do you see yourself going back to Ireland, or you're happy to be gone?
Yeah, so I mean, I had it wasn't total like prison-like conditions. I got out, I saw some stuff, so that was enjoyable for sure.
Yeah.
There were those moments where they lifted the lockdown for like a day or two.
Yeah. So
I remember I went to Grafton Street. It was just packed with, it was just one of those moments of kind of everyone getting their insanity out. But that was fun.
But I suppose it was pretty good for your study. You had literally nothing else to be doing. Like I read down through your thesis, and extremely detailed, extremely well put together, really interesting things. So like maybe in a way, COVID was a good thing that you were able to delve down deep into all this stuff, because we studied that time period. Everyone studies it in school, and we have bits about it, but the angle that you brought to it, like, oh yeah, these guys they're just like us, Collins, Griffith, and Connolly, and they had these. They were just. I think of the quote, hard times create strong people. Strong people create good times create weak people, and weak people fuck it up. In that cycle, we were at hard times and we had great people. Those people were good, and since then, the people that are put into these, positions of power have always been declining. So just tell us briefly, go through what these guys were talking about at the time in their letters.
Yeah, so jumping into my thesis, it's called Irish Anti-Imperialist and Nationalist Economics.
Yeah.
And so I start the topic on in the closing of the signing of the treaty in 1921, December. The Irish Free State is now internationally recognized, or about to be. And what happens in New York City is that financiers on Wall Street say, great, let's send them some loans. They got to finance development, railroads, all that stuff, electrical grid. And so they do a pretty sweet deal, 20, 25 million. Hey, here are the terms. What do you think? We can give you the same rates as Canada. And, you know, Canada is such a, you know, they're a just great country of stability. Meanwhile, you guys, you know, you just went through a war. So, like, this is a great deal. And instead of the Irish revolutionaries looking at that and be like, great, we need money, you know, I mean, think about current day Irish politicians and their demeanor when it comes to foreign capital and financiers and all these people. There's these letters written by Joseph Connolly, no relation to the main colony, and Harry Boland. And they're both sort of like, you know, doing ambassador-like functions within America. So they have sort of an on-the-ground view. And they hear about this because the Wall Street guys literally published it in the New York Times. So it's like, it's everywhere, it's getting attention. They sent letters to the Irish diplomatic offices. So these two guys write letters back to Michael Collins. And what they say is not, no, it doesn't make sense. You know, I don't know, the numbers don't add up. They, with super colorful language, disparage these American finance people and say they're evil. They're, you know, going to, you know, colonize us. Look what they did in places like Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Cuba. Yeah. And it's just travesty. They, you know, and it was just mind blowing to me to see how could they use this language and deny the money? It didn't make sense.
They
knew. It just did not add up. And so that's what started. I had to keep going down the rabbit hole of figuring out, well, like, what are all the Easter eggs in these two letters? Like, what are these alluding to? Like, what do they mean by what happened in Cuba? What happened in Cuba? What happened in Cuba?
Yeah.
And so that started my journey of figuring out, well, there's this entire history of Latin American and Caribbean financial imperialism that occurred at the turn of the 20th century with America. And through very, you know, dubious financial schemes that were, yes, maybe investing and funding some infrastructure or other companies down there, they basically created a situation where there was distortion of the ultimate economic structure that would properly develop those countries. Yeah. And then when there were disagreements, who's the real sovereign? And so what then the bankers would do is they would call on the US military to come down and set things straight. And so there was then these very charged political episodes and then violent, you know, rebel skirmishes that were occurring in occupied territories of Cuba and all these other places. And so it's like, wow, okay, that's how foreign finance really works.
Yeah.
And learning that and then seeing how they thought about it in the Irish context, and it's wild to think if that could have happened in Ireland. But then it's the other half of that coin is, well, then what was sort of more of the broader, like what economics did they want to put in place? If they weren't going to get money from America, where were they going to get money from? Mm. And then it opens up into this discussion of, and largely what Arthur Griffith really wrote about as sort of the main intellectual of the movement, nationalist economics, which is a long history going all the way back to the founding, you know, of America, to the founding of, you know, Japan, to Germany and their sort of industrializations. And they want to take the lessons from that tradition and apply them in Ireland, to have a sovereign national bank, to invest in infrastructure and industry, to have Ireland be an industrial exporter. And then I started to fill out the rest of, you know, what Griffith thought, what Collins thought about these ideas, what other revolutionaries thought, what the wider Irish conversation was, going all the way back to Jonathan Swift about economics. And it turns out Jonathan Swift to Arthur Griffith, that whole history of what Irish revolutionaries and nationalists were talking about in terms of economics is all super consistent and directly opposed to whatever, the current Irish conversation about economics is.
Yeah. So if we fast forward to now, right? To right now, Ireland's economy is based on foreign direct investment, low tax. We're a tax haven. The top 10 companies here pay 90% or whatever it is of the corporate tax, and I think last year was like 15 billion. Okay, so Ireland like is doing pretty well. We are on paper we are a country that is printing money because of these companies. So everyone knows that. It's been a great policy for us, but something happened 2 or 3 months ago. It's been a great policy for us, maybe not socially or culturally, but it has economically, right? But something happened a few.
I will not deny there's been advancements.
Yeah, like it is an asset to have these companies in your country, but the trick is keeping them or making them contribute to other things. We rely so much on these guys and it's going great. But when and if they leave, because of the change in the OECD tax rate, we could be fucked. So how likely do you think it is that they will leave, they are leaving, and that what you're talking about will become very important? You could be too early now, but like it's only a matter of time before you're proven right.
Yeah, so I think that the entire Celtic Tiger period, we can quibble about when it officially started. Was it when we start to integrate with Europe more, join a currency union, further but it basically starts in the 90s and it takes us through. There's a big moment of existential crisis with the great financial crisis. And then, we sort of wobble forward into this point in time. And so now with the global minimum tax rate change, the main incentive that was driving all of Ireland's alleged growth is gone. It was the foundation of everything. And up until it happened, all of the Irish politicians were fighting tooth and nail to keep it. They were willing to be the bad guys of the international community, shockingly, for all the other things they're scared to be the bad guy on.
Yeah.
Over this rule. And so it's like within the revealed preference there, it matters. It's sort of the main thing. But then through whatever leverage was used on them, they agreed to the terms. There's a few loopholes they might think they can get away with still doing some stuff in there. If you look, like research and development is an interesting loophole for people to dig into.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the main driver of Ireland's economy is gone. And then it becomes, well, Ireland has the human capital. We're high skill, we're educated, all that stuff. And that's really what is driving everything in the service sector globally. Well, you inspect that a little bit and you say, okay, well, actually, the jobs are more medium skilled. They're more administration. Yeah, there's high skilled jobs, but the real winners of the service economy scheme is, accountancy firms, doing all of the tax laundering.
Yeah.
Those are the people that are getting huge paychecks and you could say are maybe higher skilled. In terms of the tech companies, yeah, there's engineers, there's stuff like that. But it's a lot of administration. It's a lot of medium skill type of jobs. And they're not even that rippling in terms of creating as many jobs as an alternative.
So this is time for me to confess who I am, in that I am I qualified solicitor and was an investment funds lawyer. So, setting up these massive investment funds for the biggest funds in the world. And the thing that has ticked me off, and a lot of others, is what's called the Cuckoo Funds here, that come in, buy up all these apartment blocks, compete with millennials in the market, but they have all the advantages tax wise, and we have none. My job was setting these guys up and managing them. So I was like, no, I'm not. I couldn't do it. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. This is wrong. This is where I stop. And
it was your leaving crypto moment.
it wasn't as blatant as that, but on
Yeah.
reflection, that's what it was. I didn't make a stand about it or anything like that, but I'm happy to be outspoken now about it. I think it's wrong. And while I'm on this rant, one of the other things it comes into one of your suggestions is that although we have all these investment funds here with the best investment strategies across the world, like they're documented, their papers are filed with the central bank here. The Irish person doesn't have any fund structure to invest in, like a 401k in America. We don't have that. And I'm like, well, at the very least, give us that. Because like, if we're setting up, if these guys are going to house here, let's participate with them. But I just feel like we're muted financially. Our hands are tied. Anyway, so my point, why I got onto this was all my friends are lawyers, accountants, or CFAs, work in tech sales, all these jobs that, if these guys were to leave, we'd have nothing left. We're not producing anything. We're living off these. So it's so important that they stay. And if they were to leave, it would be disastrous. But the other point is nobody I know is in politics or in government making proper decisions. And, all the smart people are on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, what you're alluding to with the funds buying up housing from people actually living in them, like this is a great example of the disconnect between this fictitious economy that is overlaid on top of the real economy of Ireland. And that's where if like you start to talk to people and are like, hey, how you doing? Like, I think there's more admission of, well, there's high unemployment, or some of the like if you're not in these certain sectors, which are few jobs, like it's not like it's a great like ocean of jobs to give to Irish citizens. It's a very small pool that can actually service these companies in the way that is being talked about in the policy circles. And so I think there's just all these disconnects. And I think one of the critical things you touched on too was like people get apathetic, they get sort of their hands up in the air, and a lot of people just emigrate. The emigration rate of Ireland is about 2.5 for every 1,000 people.
It's built in. They want you to do it. They don't stop it. They're like, you have to go. We can't keep you here. It's literally baked in.
Yeah, you had a great podcast with I watched Rory Hearn.
Yeah, he talks about housing an awful lot. He's actually very, very good. And the thing about him is he's relentless. He's in the paper every day, just beating down the point. And very few people seem to pick him up on it. He will never be on RTE, which is the main, state media, I suppose. He's not given a platform to talk because he's so good and he's so right. But yeah, the housing model just has broken. But so the question I have for you is, like, is there a way of keeping Google, keeping these guys here because they are very good and beneficial, and just using them better and building things around them? Like, I don't want to see Google and their 12.5% as the enemy. It's like, well, how can we make this good thing better?
Yeah. So like I'm not opposed to like if there's a tech economy, if there's a service economy in Ireland and they're contributing to the global supply chain in some function, cool. Like I'm not against, like I grew up like in my 20s with tech, so and working around different startups. So I'm very conducive to it. I think a lot of guys do well. And I really like the fact that Stripe created a headquarters in Dublin and are looking to kind of be more of a sort of a voice in Irish development. But I would say is like the core thing is like, what are we emphasizing in policy? Like, what is the point? Like, what is the optimization for the Irish government? And I think when you look at it, it's not that you have to kill the service economy or like a financial fund that sets up. It's that the goal should be is we need to create as many good wage jobs with security, with sustainability in Ireland that has tons of room to grow so that people can stop emigrating. And as I also go further with my ideas, that some of the Irish diaspora can kind of return to Ireland. One, to contribute to the economic development, but two, because I think there's a cultural debt that needs to be kind of sort of facilitated a little bit there.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be that critical distinction made, and not penalizing, but setting up the policy so that it benefits the Irish nation. So like saying, hey, investment firms, yeah, you could locate in Ireland if you're internationally investing, and can't buy up Irish houses against the normal Irish people. That's going to be penalized.
Yeah, you can. The way I describe that one is, don't shit where you eat. You can come here, sit up here, but you can't invest here. But that, Ireland can't be seen to acknowledge the bad that they do, but then house them as well. So let's go through. Do you want to go through the 10-point plan? You can describe it any way you want, as whichever, if you want to merge some points together or anything. But can you, who is Angela Nagle, who you wrote this with?
Yeah, so this is what brings us to the reason you came across me. I just published an article called Irish Industrialization in the 21st Century, a 10-point national development plan. My co-author was Angela Nagle. She's an Irish academic that wrote a great book called Ireland Under Austerity. It's a collection of essays from a vast variety of scholars talking about the great financial crisis, about the austerity measures that were put in place, and about sort of the general economic model that Ireland operates under. Her most famous book is Kill All Normies. She became very popular for that, for describing the emergent internet phenomena that was happening post 2016, and sort of really defining what all these trends were. And since we've connected on this shared vision of looking at Ireland, how do you properly develop it? How do you create a secure economy? And how do you change Ireland out of this neoliberal paradigm?
So just going through some of the points that you made. Now, I will say, so some are very idealistic. I can't say I agree with them all, but I like talking about them all, because I think there's a lot there. None of them are wrong or anything like that, but it's fun to talk this. So the first two I'll couple together, which are leave the euro currency and create a new currency. So why should we leave the euro? What's wrong with the euro, and what can we do?
Yeah. So the fundamental point here is that, and this is really, if you had to tell me I could only keep one of my points.
This is the point you'd keep.
Well, yeah, they're connected to some of the other lower points, but
yeah, okay.
It's monetary sovereignty. I think this is such a fundamental issue, and that ceding monetary sovereignty to a regional bloc through the ECB and other bodies is disastrous. And I think it goes against, again, sort of the core vision that the Irish revolutionaries had. And unfortunately, both Michael Collins and Arthur Griffith, who were the spearhead, they died in 1992.
I'm just going to cut across you there, because I don't like this argument of the core vision of these guys that they were 100 years ago. I do like reading their letters, and I do now see that it does shine a light on it, but I don't care what they said 100 years ago. So I don't want any influence from that, because
so I get that point.
Yeah. So let's go. Yeah.
So I get, like, hey, it's not good because it's 100 years old. Like, they could be wrong. What I would more so say is that through opening our lens up from just Ireland in 1922, and we go into sort of the entire intellectual history of economics, and you go back to Adam Smith in 1776, and you go all the way through David Ricardo, and then you get into a guy that I like a lot. His name is Frederick List. He's a German economist. He did time in America. He came back to Germany. He created basically the counter tradition to classical economics that has been inherited through neoclassical and neoliberal economics.
What year was he alive?
He published his major work in 1841, The National System of Political Economy.
Yeah.
And but he was learning from individuals that were stretching all the way back. Again, I've actually traced a lot of these discussions to Jonathan Swift as the earliest sort of point I could find on sort of thinking about tariffs, thinking about money, thinking about industrialization in this way. And so and you could go into sort of, there was French economists, there was people in Scotland that were also getting at this earlier. There's people in America that was trying to attempt this. Alexander Hamilton is the most cited individual. He was the Secretary of Treasury in America after the Revolution. He wrote 2 reports on manufacturing and credit. They became these like templates of how we think about national industrialization and development. I would go further, and this is an interesting connection I have that I'm kind of writing a book on now. There's 2 individuals, Matthew Carey, born in Dublin, exiled to Ireland, exiled to America, becomes the zeitgeist intellectual of the American Revolution when it comes to economics specifically. It's very likely the case that he contributed in many sort of inspirational ways to the creation of Hamilton's reports. He lives past Hamilton, writes a bunch of books. Frederick List actually comes and literally stays with him, and he tutors Frederick List as a younger man in his older days. Writes more books, talks about this stuff. Matthew Carey's son, who's born in America, Henry Charles Carey, goes on to become more of a formal economist, writes a bunch of books, a bunch of papers. He becomes the chief economic advisor of Abraham Lincoln, and is the inspiration for what I see as both the American and German industrial schools of thought when it comes to how do you make a nation state develop. Yeah. And so you have these alternate traditions of classical and nationalist economics. And as time goes forward, then we go past the Irish Revolution, 1916, 1922, and we see the post-war East Asian tigers develop. And what scholars that are living today, like Han Jun Chang, who I cite a lot, he studied the gamut of these countries. His native country is South Korea. And he says they actually did exactly what Frederick List, Matthew Carey, all of these older guys, said we're saying to do to industrialize what the current IMF and all of Harvard and all those guys say is the wrong thing to do. This is what is actually successful. And so by combining the older history, the global history, and the more newer history, I've come to the deduction that what Arthur Griffith and the rest of his cadre were sort of getting at was maybe not on every single point correct, but on the whole, that was the right direction to point Ireland in.
Yeah.
So that's my only point.
Yeah. Okay. So like you let's just put it this way: you're extremely well read on economic theory and history. Better read than most. Most people don't even think that think that there is this economic theory passed down and worked upon and improved upon. So tell me, what is the South Korean model success story, and how it differs to Ireland? Compare the two.
Yeah, so I would say, and this gets back to like sort of having a sovereign currency. So they had a sovereign currency. I look at South Korea. They went through Japanese colonization in sort of the 20th century. They went through the Korean War. A lot of similarities to Ireland. Just describing that. They get out. About the 1950s is when they start to stand on their own 2 feet, and they have a few breaks here and there. But by the late 60s and into the 70s, this is when their moment happens. And they start to really engage with this type of material. And what they do is they focus on key industrial sectors that they want to target and that they want to grow. They invest directly in them and subsidize them. They put up tariffs to make sure that they're not getting undue competition from foreign markets. They are using their currency and their central bank to, yes, depreciate their currency in some respect to cause inflation, to make goods cheaper to exporters, to subsidize industries and this. But what ends up happening is, because of the certain choices and that they're making, they're investing in industries that have increasing returns to scale. And this is sort of the core insight of, it's not like picking winners and choosers. It's not like, central planning. It's creating an incentive structure around the economy that prioritizes things we can identify as increasing returns to scale. And what increasing returns to scale means, for every input you put into it, you increasingly get more and more outputs out of it.
Yeah.
And it just, lo and behold, the best way to do that is through things like machinery, like making cars, making electronics, which they're famous for.
So just tell me straight up, what industries work in South Korea that we could do here? Like, what is their thing that they're doing?
Yeah. So, and this is where, like, this is a dynamic thing. Like, this is what makes sense for your geographic region, for your culture, for everything involved. And you're combining that with, hey, here's a template of generic things that we can start applying.
Yeah.
I think in general, we can look at these top sectors of, like, okay, what within heavy machinery and manufacturing can Ireland produce? What within sort of consumer electronics can Ireland produce?
Yeah.
And you keep going down the line with that. What in pharmaceuticals can Ireland produce? There's already some of this here in Ireland. I mean, like, Ireland was, within the 80s into the 90s, they were making computer parts. Ireland still makes, pharmaceutical products.
Yeah.
I think the verticalization of that is problematic to some degree. I don't like the idea that there's foreign companies that are setting up plants here and sort of they're owning the IP, and they're, they could shift that factory wherever they want, and R&D is done somewhere else. So I don't exactly love that, but there's a lot of sort of ingredients that are already in Ireland. I think what a cool one is that, the top airlines of Europe are sort of Irish, Ryanair.
Tony Ryan, great man.
Yeah. Why don't we start making airplanes for Ryanair in Ireland? Like, it's a bold idea, but why not? We have air industry.
They up in Northern Ireland, they make there's a jet. I forget the name of it. There is a plant in Northern Ireland. I know that's not within the Republic, but so it's shut down. But making airplanes is probably a bad example because there's only two major companies in the world.
Yeah, but just to not make myself look foolish.
Yeah.
But when I say that, I'm throwing an idea out.
Yeah, no. But so I want to work with your idea. I want to work with your idea because your idea is right. Like, the airlines won't work, but drones will. Like light aircraft. So why don't, like? And this is a new industry. Why aren't we jumping on it? The Collison brothers bought a small airport in West Dublin, and I was wondering, why is that? And apparently it actually is because of the way they see drone technology improving for light aircraft. It's a long-term play. So, that's one industry. One of the solutions I have to all of it, well, my idea is that education of software skills, of, basic computer skills, computer science, engineering, and a lot of the problems solve themselves if you equip kids with the ability to do all this stuff. Like, and I just don't know why I think it comes back to education. I can't code. I don't know anything about coding. I wish I could, but you can see all the cool people, in the world right now are the top coders. You from Musk to Bezos to the guy who created some punk NFT project. They're all coders.
Yeah. So just to touch quickly back on, like, picking industries, like, when I say, like, we should build airplanes, like, that's an inspirational statement to then further the conversation into, like you said, well, maybe it's not airplanes, but it's drones, or maybe it's this specific machinery part that's like that's embedded within the plane somewhere. We can get a small to medium-sized enterprise that manufactures that piece, and then we can sell that to global markets.
Yeah, you know what Luxembourg is? Luxembourg apparently, sorry, do you know what Luxembourg is? It's a country. Sorry. Luxembourg is one of the biggest manufacturers of space equipment, satellites and things like that. And it's all because they had one company that started in, like, the 1980s that was profitable, and the whole industry has just mushroomed around Luxembourg. And I'm just like, again, software skills, if software and hardware skills, if we just had more of that, instead of training everyone to be a lawyer or an accountant. You know, the emphasis should be on the other thing. So do you think there's a way of you know, doing, we'll come to some of your other parts of your plan, but if we leave the euro, will Google stick around? Like, does that just nuke them straight away?
Yeah. Well, it's an open question because there's all these overlapping structures on Europe. There's the Schengen zone, there's the European Union, there's the Eurozone, there's NATO, we could keep going down of like, well, what really makes Europe as like a region, a zone that multinational business can flexibly operate in? And so I would say is like, does Google have trouble operating within Sweden?
Can you repeat that?
Does Google have trouble operating in Sweden?
No.
So I mean, like Sweden has its own currency. They're not in the Eurozone. Sweden's in the European Union. There may not be the same level of, Ireland is the tentpole, and then they use that to sort of do a bunch of work that goes around not only Europe, but then, North Africa and the Middle East too, that happens in Ireland. But I think, maybe there would be some diminishment of that. But I think just as multiple countries within Europe currently operate, Ireland can have its own sovereign currency. It can still be a member of the international market. Businesses can still come back and forth through it. Again, allegedly, the tax thing doesn't matter anymore to a lot of the mainstream Irish thinking. And it's all about the human capital that's already in existence here and the education system that makes that. If that's the case, then, my ideas is not going to change the human capital. So it's there. So I would say, I don't think leaving the Eurozone really is that unthinkable, will create all this chaos. I will talk to the risk involved with, well, what are all the ramifications of sort of blowing up the Eurozone to some degree? What will that do within the European Union? There's some other policies I have that are, seemingly contradictory. Will there be FX exchange risk? What about foreign creditors? Will they actually invest in Ireland anymore? How will we finance our budgets? All this stuff. Will Granny go without getting her check? Can the hospitals run? There's certainly some risk that is there. I would say I've already suggested within some of these points crucial mechanisms that will prevent some of these things. I'll mention just one quickly.
Yeah, go.
Once you start a new Irish currency, you should not convert bank deposits that exist in Ireland to that new currency. All the euro currency denominated bank deposits should be held constant. So what this means is that instead of what maybe an older model of this would have been, you convert everything. Immediately what you just set up for yourself is a demand to sell the new Irish currency. So now you have selling pressure. So now you're pushing your currency into the ground because you just made that arbitrary decision. Now you flip that, you keep it in euro, but you have to pay your Irish taxes in the new Irish currency.
Yeah.
There's going to be people that start adopting the new Irish currency for whatever mechanism. And what then happens is now the Irish currency is appreciating. People got to buy it. There's demand going the other way.
It's a token launch.
Exactly. So this is a critical way of in that moment of introducing it, you're protecting against a currency going through the floor.
So basically what we're saying is that Stripe are going to launch their own blockchain, and they're going to come home to Dublin, and they're going to launch the Irish token, and that's going to be our new currency, and the Collinson brothers are going to be in charge.
I'm happy, and this, this is another variant of central bank digital currency. That we can touch upon where, this is a great merging of crypto stuff and nationalist central banking. I think there's mechanisms to facilitate, Stripe can do a lot of front end stuff for the Central Bank of Ireland that I'm sort of forecasting in my plan here. I think it'd be awesome to figure out a way that they could engage in creating an Irish central bank digital currency.
Yeah.
I think they're already trying to do that around the world. They hired the Bank of England's former one of their chiefs, and he was a super bull on central bank digital currency.
Yeah.
And I think those guys got something cooked up that they're not telling anybody.
So do I.
They're going to try to do that.
Yeah, I think coming back to crypto, I think the big players, Google, everyone who've just mentioned, Google, Amazon, Apple, they're not gonna let this one get away. Like whether they launch on a chain or their own chains, this kind of segues into like we have the big tech companies here. The big tech companies are they're bigger than countries. There is this fight of the surveillance, the platforms that they have. Twitter can kick the president of America off their platform. There's these huge conversations like, how big are these guys? Is it better that we stick with them, keep them happy? It's better the devil Should we be sticking with Google, whatever they say? I think that's the Irish policy at the moment. Certainly was with Apple. Are you in any way scared of big tech?
I don't know, because again, like now that the tax change has happened, like how invested are they in Ireland anymore? Like an interesting clue to look at some of this stuff is real estate deals. And like one of the things that some people have like pointed out to me, like I haven't looked this up, is like, oh look, Google just set up a new office. Here's an article from February 1st. That is like they're going to ink this deal. They're going to bring workers, blah, blah. And it's like, real estate deals take a long time to do. Like by the time you see the like announcement, or whatever phase it's at, there's like the starting point is like a boardroom discussion about, okay, go out, survey, where are we going to go, what makes sense, talk to accounting, like, and then move it forward in each department. How's it going to work? Get advisors, consultants to figure. Like there's so many steps that take years to facilitate to do a real estate deal. So for things like that, I don't think you're going to see evidence of the global tax change until maybe 5 years from now.
Yeah.
That they're going to start deciding, we're going to set up maybe a different office over here. We're going to maybe slowly close down an office we set up in Ireland.
It'd be a slow drip. But yeah, like everything we're saying is very early. The timing is everything. But as I said, economy's going great, on paper, all these things are happening. But I think you're right. I just think you're early. The Google drip away, we saw it there's been a few announcements. Every time we don't get a deal, everyone's like, oh, that's why. It's because of the tax. And Intel announced that they weren't coming for something and they went to Germany and everyone was like, oh, it's because of the tax. It's happening. So maybe it'll happen fast, maybe it'll happen slow. So that, that's again where I'm like, we need to pander to Google to say, well, we've got all these education courses, we've got all the staff you need, we've got your data centers, anything you need, you just stay here. Because
but that's another good point. That like the other piece of this that overlaps into each camp is infrastructure.
Yeah,
that like will be needed. And so like there's the talk of there's going to be like more and more electricity blackouts in Ireland.
Yeah,
energy costs are going to go through the roof.
Yeah.
And data centers are a huge hog. Like you're setting up a situation where Google is going to be siphoning off priority energy from a regular Irish citizen.
Yeah. But think now, the data center thing, I think I tried to think about it is like having these data centers here, like they're huge assets in a way for protection. No, like or their targets, whichever way you want to look at it. Yeah. So let's say we go into World War III, China, Russia, America, right? It'll be a tech war based on all these systems. And will the data centers be crucial in that war? Probably. I have no idea, but you'd imagine so. Will they be protected? Will they be targets? So I don't know. That's a totally different conversation.
Let's just go with that. Let's go with that and say, okay, we want to keep the data centers. Yeah. How are you going to power them?
Well, now I'll let you talk, because you're saying that we should have all these more national energy projects, and you refer to the hydro stationed down in Limerick, which I actually didn't know the history about. And you're saying that was the champion of Irish industrial productivity back in the 30s. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a fantastic example of illuminating what I'm trying to get at here, where like you need to have vision, you need to be a little bit idealistic, you need to have the tenacity to use the functions of the state to have long-term investment time horizon. I mean, you know this, your investments. What's your time horizon? That matters. What are you trying to get out of this? The state has the longest time horizon. They can make these critical infrastructure investments.
Yeah.
And so looking at the Shannon hydro plant as an example, Ireland was dependent on English coal to fuel everything. Right before the revolution, a little bit forward into the 20s, Arthur Griffith started sort of the initial research into like saying, how do we get out of this? Like, doesn't Ireland have energy? What can we do about this?
Yeah.
And so he's tried to stumble upon, there's hydropower here. How do we start to do that?
Yeah.
He set up a commission within the Irish, revolutionary government to sort of study this more. Like, there were guys, gunshots going on, and they were typing away, looking up hydro statistics. And so those facts keep going and emerging. And then through the 20s, as you could say, faulty as the conservative government of the 20s Free State was, they kept this going. This somehow kept having energy and legs. And then what Collins does too in 1922, he deliberately and explicitly talks about, we're replacing English coal with Irish hydropower. Yeah. This is what we need to do. We need to electrify the nation. And so that was another like big push in this direction. And so then what happens, and I'll just read a little bit about this episode. So then in 1924, the Irish government appointed a panel of foreign experts from Siemens Schuckert Company of Germany to conduct further research, and it concluded to support the hydroelectric ideas that the Irish nationalists were coming to. In 1931, the Shannon plant met 96% of Ireland's electricity generation needs and continued to do so until the 1950s. The Financial Times in the era commented that the Irish were the shrewdest of psychologists. They have thrown on their shoulders no easy task of breaking what is in reality an enormous inferiority complex. The Shannon scheme is one, and probably the most vital of their methods of doing it.
It's really interesting because it's something that I don't even know that's there. We do at the moment have a lot of wind farms on land and on sea, but recently it's been highlighted that we have capacity for so much more because of the advancements in deep wind farms, the ability to go out deeper and things like that. So we have limitless amounts of wind, but it's all big American companies and European companies doing it because that's who's set up to do it. You can't just compete in today's market and go, oh, I'm going to set up a wind farm company, or even the government. The government, don't know how to do it. These wind farms are owned by the big funds. That's who's investing in all these things. And it's that pool of capital. That's why it comes back to money. It's that pooling of capital that actually finances all these and that finances globalization. And I'd love if we had all these national projects and we could say, look, that was built by Irish company, but
Irish engineers.
Yeah. It's just such, it takes big thinking, long-term thinking to put that in motion. And when you look at the practicalities of what faces the politicians who are supposed to put this in motion, worried about having a glass of champagne at a party indoors when there was a COVID restriction and having to deal with that for weeks in the paper and shit like that. So that's just a snapshot of the loop of how do you get it done. So, how do I agree with what a lot of what you say, the idealism of it. How do you do it?
Yeah, I just, this is where, again, a lot of times I can be very numbers based and, it's about the economy and all that type of stuff. But, I draw a lot of inspiration from the Irish nationalists of the revolutionary period. And, if you notice, I got Arthur Griffith hanging on my wall right over my shoulder.
Yeah. So you're deep into it.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be a revolution. You know, we're not going pow, pow, pow.
I'm not saying anything that can be taken out of context. What I'm saying is,
but we have to be. I want to pull you. I actually want to pull you up because I want to just tell you about the Irish. The Irish. If you come into and start talking about 1916 and what people did then, nobody will take you seriously in Ireland because you're immediately cast as you're a Sinn Fein, 32 counties fanatic and things like that. Whereas we haven't even mentioned 32 counties or any of that stuff. You know, this has got to do with economics. But one thing we haven't talked about is, you know, the violence that went on, you know, and the stigma attached to what happened. People don't like talking about it. So day to day, nobody talks about 1916 Rising. It's kind of uncomfortable to talk about because it goes down a dark hole. So when you shine a new light on it about, oh, well, let's talk about the economic ideas behind it. I'm like, yeah, cool. This guy's got something different here. He's not got a tricolor on his face. He's got something different.
And just interject real quick. And this was Arthur Griffith's like main point through everything.
Yeah.
This is why he's like, people ridicule him because he had this idea of a dual monarchy at one point of saying, well, if we have this symbolic dual monarchy, but we get to control our entire economy, that's what matters. Like the economy is what the thing we want the steering wheel. So, that's where I'm like so focused on the economy, but I'm also focused on, again, what is fueling all of that energy. It's the fact that these guys had just like idealism that would project them through all of these trials and tribulations. And again, English colonization, probably a harder trial than you know, bureaucratic ruffling feathers. I'll say that.
Yeah. So you know, presentation of these ideas is part of it, and having to negotiate that aspect of it. So the way I see it is, practically speaking, what's going to happen in Irish politics is Sinn Fein are going to get in next. It's been long overdue that we had someone else. They're going to come with whatever policies they have. They're not known for like renowned, you know, economic policies. They're known for, you know, being in the opposition, battering down the current government. And then I think they'll do all the hard work. When they get there, then we're going to have to see what happens. It could go equally bad as good or whatever, but everyone is up for the change. But I think what's going to happen then, 4 or 5 years on, people will realize, well, okay, we don't like Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. These Sinn Féin people weren't great either. Or is that it? Like, is there nothing new going to happen?
Yeah, I think the obvious logic everyone can draw from the voting data is that, you know, Sinn Féin is a matter of time, not, you know, if it's possible. And so not to say that, you know, Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil can't use these ideas, but okay, let's just look at that for what it is, agnostic of any history or context of what Sinn Féin is. This is a opportunity to have a fresh party come in that has idea, like they won on housing. Like, I don't care what their other ideas are. The reason Irish people voted for Sinn Féin is because they talked about the housing.
Housing, number one, yeah.
So it's like that's the core of what's fueling people to vote for them. And if they're smart, they'll continue to lean in to that type of economic, and again, like nationalism of, we're prioritizing the nation state, the citizens of Ireland over a multinational investment fund.
Yeah.
Like that is something that beckons at the ideas I'm presenting here. And that, again, it doesn't need to be, you know, it's not because of what guys said 100 years ago, because they said 100 years ago, or every single, you know, provocative statement I might make.
Yeah.
But it's to get at this direction that needs to start pointing Ireland in terms of thinking about how are we getting energy? How are we industrializing the economy, moving into areas of increasing returns to scale and sustainability versus a service economy that can be replaced overnight and that is dependent on a special tax loophole fostering it.
These ideas are starting to be fleshed out more, but not enough. In the Irish Times last week, there was a very good article by Fintan O'Toole, who's the #1 columnist who's been there for 50 years or whatever. And he talked about this, our economic model is just not sustainable because we rely so much on these companies. So people are saying it, and hopefully, the message gets through. But I kind of just want to ask you, like, so what's your next play? So like you've done the crypto things. You understand what's coming in terms of CBDCs and things like that. You've got this passion for Ireland. You've spent time here. You've got this political ideology and economic ideology for Ireland. So where do you go now? So do you keep banging this drum? Do you go away and look at something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think what my long-term project is to write and advocate for this tradition of economic nationalism that harkens back to many years in the past of successful implementations of it. When you talk, and frankly, as some of my other sort of colleagues within this school of thought think, this is really the only way you develop an economy. I mean, you need manufacturing, you need all these pieces in place, or you're essentially a colony in an imperial system, and like there's a core and there's a periphery, and you're the one getting shanked on that deal.
Yeah.
So that's my big project. I think Ireland, as this sort of case study, is super interesting to me, from just like looking at it from an academic. But again, through my journey, I've come to terms with the fact that I think Ireland has this moment of time to change things. It can be this very revelatory change that sets an example for the rest of the world. And personally, I identify, as an Irish American. All my family are Irish.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting.
Do we know where they're from?
What?
Do you know where they're from?
Tallow, Waterford, or where my Ryans are from.
Waterford.
Yes.
Up the Dacia. Yeah. No, I'm from Tipperary, which is not too far. But yeah, and when did they move over to or emigrate to?
Yeah, so not like too recently. Most of my ancestors are, they immigrated about 100 years. So like kind of in the span of 1910 through 1930, they all made their way eventually to America. And I think and one of the things that within my studies at UCD I came across was this exchange between America and Ireland during the Revolution. And I think what's totally glossed over is the fact that the Irish Americans raised about $6 million in those terms in those days, which would be equivalent to about $80 to $100 million today.
Yeah.
And there was this, and so there was so much propaganda and sort of authentic propaganda of like, jazzing up all the Irish Americans. These were poor people too. These were working class people. They were sending money to fight the war, and then with the Civil War, and then how the Free State developed. There was a lot of confusion and disenchantment with Irish Americans about their connection. But prior to that, America was this hotbed of facilitating an exchange of, how is Ireland going to eventually break free? And here's sort of a rest stop for exiled Irish to come and then go back to Ireland to do whatever their campaign was.
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole conversation to be had about, should Irish Americans have the right to return to Ireland? I make that a point. I think it could be a helpful economic policy.
Yes. So what do you mean by should they be allowed to return in terms of like, should they be given a passport?
Yeah, I mean, there's already a policy that's like that. We got to prove who your grandparents were. You have to get some records. Yeah. So there's already stuff like that. I would open that up a little bit more in terms of, going back to the famine. I would open that up to make it easier, more of a proactive thing. Start funding programs. I came to in New York. I was in New York City. A lot of my friends there were Jewish and have a connection to Israel. I had a close understanding of how Israel facilitates its sort of diaspora and then into its home nation. They have a bunch of programs. There's like a 2-week vacation they do with college-age kids to come back to Israel to gin up the culture. There's ties there, and there's important economic ties, cultural ties, all sorts of ties that is facilitated by a proactive strategy of engaging with the diaspora. And whether that's cynical and utilitarian or not, I think there is more of a, an authentic feeling of, there is a real Irish diaspora out there. In America, we were kind of clustered. We had our schools, our churches, we were very insular. And now with sort of the way things have developed in the world, people are sort of understanding their identity in different ways. And for someone like me, I'm kind of looking and saying, well, why can't I be Irish? Why can't I contribute to the Irish, next step?
Yeah, it's an interesting one that I haven't thought about before, but the example of Israel brings it home for me. We did a program back in 2013, which was called it wasn't the reunion. It was some national thing to bring all your family home in 2013 to stimulate the economy. So our family we had about 40 or 50 people there, that flew in from all around, people I'd never met before, but the gathering, it was called the gathering. Anyway, they should have kicked on from that. They did it and they didn't kick on. In your list as well, you also have nuclear. Do you think that's nuclear energy? Do you think that's possible that we'd have a nuclear energy plant in Ireland?
There's a lot of talk over environmental issues and global warming and respectable discourse that's happening. I think the only way to maximize environmental sustainability while getting just the baseline for what Ireland needs energy-wise, and then to have this aggrandizement of industry and growth, you need a lot of energy. And so nuclear is the only way to really do that. France figured this out before everybody else, I think, and in the best way. There's a lot of things to look at the French model of nuclear energy. One of the things that was very interesting about that was they created a national system of sort of what's the best way to describe this? Like parts and machinery and how things work together. And what ended up happening was in places like America and other places, you'll have a company do a nuclear plant and a team of engineers, and the parts and how it all comes together, they're different. There's variety there, and it creates complexity that creates problems.
Yeah.
In France, they streamlined everything. Everything became streamlined, so everything became super efficient. So if engineers had to move back and forth, if parts had to move back and forth, everyone understands how the system works. So I think going further and further into seeing how did the French figure out nuclear really well, and applying that to Ireland solves that initial, how do we get higher energy output while reducing our environmental, degradation?
Yeah.
And that's how you.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Nuclear, it's what's the analogy is like the way the world treats nuclear energy is if we had crashed the first car that was ever made and we decided to never make cars again. The advancements are there, everyone says it, but it's just hard one to swing for governments and things like that to implement.
And I remember hearing there's a stat that more people have died of solar panels than nuclear, and that's because the unintended consequence of solar panels is that people are falling off their roof, cleaning and installing. So there's risk and there's trade-offs to everything. I think, I'm very bullish on hydropower. There's a great project called The Spirit of Ireland. People can Google. It was attempted about a decade ago. There's an Irish academic that really fostered the sort of fleshing out of
what was that person? Who was that?
He's got an Eastern European name. I think he's at Trinity. I forget his name, but
okay, I'll look him up.
Ireland Hydro. And the point of the matter was they were going to use the cliffs of Moher and sort of the entire Atlantic coastline almost. And they were not the entire, but they were going to set it up so that it's a pumped hydro system. You have at the bottom of the cliffs, the reserve where all the seawater is. And when wind power is available on the top, you'll use wind turbines to basically pump that water up into another reserve that sits at the top of the cliff. And then because wind is volatile, when you need energy, you can just tap the reserve and then push it down the cliff and spin a turbine that way. And it was a great idea. The economics made sense. The energy engineering made sense. There were investors, and the only problem was that there wasn't enough money, and there wasn't enough money from the state. And the state was trying to dabble with it. Eamon Ryan, everyone thinks about him, he was trying to push this. He had some hands on this, yeah. But it fell apart because they couldn't find financing from private investors, and the state didn't want to make the commitment. And I don't know what the other shenanigans that go on with, hydro globally is not a respected alternative energy. Everyone is bullish on solar and solar and wind. I tend to think that's because they break down every 10 years, and there's a whole global supply chain to facilitate them. Whereas hydro, you build it and you have to touch it for 100 years.
That's the other deep conspiracy theory, that things are only made to break.
Hydro is sustainable.
Hydro just keeps going.
It's the pool of water. That's it. That's water.
Yeah. It's interesting, but no one's going to make these decisions. Is the sad part. Until some company comes along and realizes that we can finance all of this and do it ourselves.
Well, this is again, I get to point one, because this is what I see as we can't do anything unless Goldman Sachs says we can do it and gives us the money.
Yeah.
Why can't the Irish Central Bank give a loan out to this, make this happen, finance it? That's what they did with the Shannon Hydro plant. Everyone said they were crazy. They did it. They generated 96% of Irish energy for 20 years. And the problem is that we have an incorrect view of money. We have an incorrect view of how finance works, foreign finance, domestic finance. And to fill those gaps where foreigners and private sector short-term entities don't want to fill, you need the state to come in with long-term time horizon and the public goods dilemma solving ability to actually finance those critical infrastructure components, like a hydro facility, like high-speed internet cable that goes throughout the country.
Do you think with CBDCs are coming, right? So there's going to be this fundamental shift in money, and it's not too far away. Is that not the perfect opportunity to say, well, we're going to have a CBDC, but Ireland, you'll have your own CBDC, France, you'll have yours, or something? Is that not the perfect time to make the break when we're about to upgrade our money anyway?
Well, hey, there's loopholes. If we're talking surface level, there would be a Europe-wide CBDC. There should not be an Italian and Irish one. Now, there's ways you could do loopholes. I forget what they were called. Italy kind of did this not too long ago, where they were using sort of a proxy currency, sort of to the disgruntlement of the rest of the European community. You could Google it. I'll send you the name.
Well, that is the other thing. You could just have a shadow currency of some sort. That's just, it's getting a bit mad then. But
that's where it's hey, if we're gonna spin all these plates, let's just be open about it and institute. And this is where I say this is why CBDC is another great paradigm shift to foster this transition.
Yeah.
But you need to exit the Eurozone because it's a core periphery dynamic. France and Germany, they do some good things for the periphery, but ultimately, they're the centers. Everything else is sort of supposed to be undeveloped so that their developed industrial economies can function.
Yeah.
And everyone loses on that because an undeveloped country needs its own sovereign monetary policy to develop it further. And then there's a overlap in terms of the political sovereignty and the monetary sovereignty. Because if you're not in a political union, if you're not the same nation, you have competing interests. And so, of course, Germany and France are not going to want sort of an inflationary currency or a depreciating currency that is funding all these things, creating competitors to their industrial sectors. So they're going to put the kibosh on all of that. They might give loans and aid and all this stuff like they did with the bailouts with Ireland, but it's only so Ireland cuts its civil programs, and
Yeah.
creates more and more degradation and undevelopment.
Yeah. So what do you think about uh, El Salvador and like that project? Like now, what? Let's just park. Actually, let's just pretend Bitcoin does what it says on the tin. Okay. Let's not go down the will Bitcoin work? But the president of El Salvador, he's trying now. Whether he's a sock puppet for someone else or that's different, but on the face of it, he's trying to do something because he literally had the worst country in the world. The biggest, highest crime rates, all this. He's trying to get volcano energy. He's trying to get a new currency going as best he can.
So El Salvador, wider Latin American history, a lot of the countries like Argentina, for example, at the turn of the 20th century, they're some of the most industrialized and developed countries in the world. And then through wars and shenanigans, especially within the post-war era, neoliberalism invaded, all of South America and resulted in what you see today, for the most part. Milton Friedman economics, comparative advantage. Don't have a central bank that is sovereign and sort of investing in industries that are important, but dollarize and cut civil services. Buy from America, take more loans out, and then the interest rates go up, and then you're in a debt spiral.
They were what Connolly and Griffith wrote against.
Exactly. So what happened in the second half of the 20th century with Latin America was the maturation of when my thesis, where I describe what first happens in Cuba, and what first happens in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And so that keeps going on. And so you have neoliberalism, basically. I mean, I'm not going to say there's not other problems that make countries not develop, but neoliberalism is a big factor in all these countries, especially if they were once good and then they declined. With El Salvador and this new president, he's young and now he's moved to Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin in this dynamic can be called neoliberalism. It's the same sort of idea. It's okay, we were totally dollarized before. We were dependent on foreign creditors. So how do we change that? Let's just switch the dollar to another foreign currency we don't control. And let's still try to take credit out and debt out with foreigners. Hopefully they'll develop us. Yeah. And at this time, with a super volatile currency that now is legal tender, and ordinary people, and also who most of them don't have cell phones or don't have the capabilities to
transact.
Yeah. And in the wallet technology, I know some of the devs, they're shysters. It's not actually decentralized; it's a centralized interface. Yeah. Is operating then on the blockchain. It's a dog and pony show, and but it doesn't get to the core problem, which is that you're not taking sovereign monetary control to set up the right regulations and window guidance to orient the sectors, to stimulus directly, and then to keep out foreign creditors that are going to spiral you into debt. Instead, you're just switching the currency ticker.
Yeah.
And it's a worse ticker at the same time. So I don't think, maybe they'll get a speculative boom. And that's the problem with trying to describe this as I do with Ireland. There's speculative booms that show growth. Yeah. People buy houses and cause more crashes. But it's ultimately not sustainable.
You're kind of getting at the thinking behind the president. He's willing to try that. If someone showed up on his doorstep and go, we'll build a nuclear plant here, he'd probably, if we can finance it, let's go. My point is it's just a newer way of thinking. At least he's trying. It might not work, but
yeah, I mean, there's and this is I think my ultimate message to Ireland. If you could take one thing away, my point about leaving the Eurozone, take that for what it is, but to look around the world at different models, because there is this encasement in an English economic model of an or American centric. It's either Oxford and Cambridge or it's Harvard and Yale, and those are the only places that infect the economic ideology of Ireland. Whereas I'm saying, like, you're look at Estonia, look at some of these other places. I'm saying, look at Germany's industrialization, look at Japan, look at South Korea, look at Taiwan, look at Singapore, and you'll be able to see like there's a whole other world out there with different books and scholars and ways of looking at the world, and I think has a lot more evidence under the belt of showing how you can properly do this. And to look at like Japan, for example, in different periods they had different ways of going about this, but focusing in on sort of the post-war 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, what they did with their monetary authority was they set credit quotas. And so they said, look, we're not choosing like what the companies are. We're telling to be a local private bank that has reserves with us. In order to do, if you want that access and the other sort of guarantees, insurances we provide, here are the quotas. You need to invest this much amount of credit into, let's say, manufacturing cars, into, say, manufacturing this, do it.
Yeah.
And it gets more technical from there. And so by doing that, you're allowing the market to locally and decentralized way pick who these companies are, who's maturing, who's not, who to expand more credit to, but always you need the quantity of credit to be flowing through in these directed ways.
Yeah.
And so this is where it's like, you don't need a foreigner to come over and say, yeah, we'll give you all this money to build a nuclear plant. What you need is the proper incentive structure in place to facilitate the allowances of credit. And to a certain degree, and this gets into the wider question of like, what is money? What is credit? Like ultimately credit is money creation. And you're, by enabling local banks to give credit out, you know, it's not like fractional reserve banking, because that's sort of, as I've come to learn, you know, more fictitious than real. And it's really about the fact that they're writing new money into existence by issuing these loans. Yeah. And so if that's the reality of what's actually happening, and you can read other books, I recommend a guy like Richard Werner, who's written a book called The Princes of Yen. Another great book. Another book he wrote was Where Does Money Come From? He did that with a team of scholars. And it gets into all of this crucial information. And so I would say is like, you need to acknowledge that fact that you don't need foreigners. You can create the money. You can create it through credit here in Ireland. And to the reality of savings that are in Ireland, like people save, like there's deposits that will back these up. There's collateral. And so it's like the real problem is not that there's no money to do this. It's the fact that the direction of that money never goes into Irish economic development. And this was the same message that was talking, and again, crucify me, but like 100 years ago, this was the same message they were talking about. They're like, we're looking at the bank balance sheets. They have the money. This isn't a question of like, Irish people are so poor, they don't have the money to invest in their own stuff. The money was there. Irish people were saving. It was being invested abroad. It was being invested in Manchester. It was being invested in manufacturing in England. It was being invested in you know, stagnant securities, treasury securities over in Britain. So it wasn't even earning like real interest. So it was like this like baffling thing. It was because the banking establishment was just so status quo and sterile that they didn't want anything to do with investing in, you know, the mass populace of Ireland and increasing their development, and especially at the risk of harming competitors in England.
Yeah, I think. Did you do any study or focus on the vote to change our currency to the euro? Because
like polls, like recently, if they're like, what people yes no should we?
Yeah, but it's just a funny time. Like I remember it. Like it turns out that was actually one of the most crucial things that happened. Like I remember I was 11 years old or 10 years old, and we changed to the euro. I think there was a referendum in Ireland to do it, and it would be good. It might be good to go back now and read about the people that voted, you know, that were campaigning against this. And you know, I'd say it gets some good, you know, thoughts and articles around that time. I actually, you know, I'm kind of thinking this out myself, because that's actually when it changed. Like one of the problems at the moment now in getting a mortgage, you know, you're talking about credit and debt, is that the banks aren't allowed give out mortgages outside of a certain band like, well, it's a certain multiple of your salary, and there's all these stringent rules. But the banks actually know that they want to change these rules, but they can't because of European regulation and and the central bank can't make up its own rules because it's not independent, because we have the euro. So yeah, like I completely agree with it. I just don't know how we go. It doesn't get solved.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm not saying it's not difficult, and like this is a problem. Like I mean, these problems were like Greece is another story, but it's like people were talking about this in Greece, people were talking about this in Italy, in
Yeah,
Spain. There is the periphery of Europe that is
yeah.
all having this shared conversation. Another cool book by an Irishman, Cormac Lucy. It's called Plan B. He kind of talks about the solutions of a Euro exit, and he says, look, a really like sort of an optimal way to go about this bad situation is you got to team up with the rest of the periphery and say, look, we're all going to exit at the same time. And so, as much as it's a story about Ireland, this might require sort of the genesis of, hey, what do you guys want to do over in Spain? What do you guys want to do over in Italy? And if we're all on the same page of we all need to industrialize our economies in a certain way, and we need sovereign monetary power to do that.
Yeah.
That could be an implementation of it, but I think there's no getting around this fact that a lot of Irish elites have been status quo and comfortable for too long, and you need to shake things up. You need to stir it up, as the great scholar Bob Marley once said, and you need to get some energy going. And maybe that's where idiots like me from America have sort of blind spots on the Irish sort of cultural norms that I can sort of take some of that like 1776, trucker hat, pickup truck energy and like bring it over.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's certainly good to hear a different point of view, and I've enjoyed this chat. I think I think we should do another chat in.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mean, people can follow me at ryanresearch.co,
Yeah,
subscribe, all that good stuff. My goal with this Irish topic is to continue to write, record podcasts, expand the knowledge base on these issues, the history of it, the numbers of it, the policy platforms of it.
do you hold any cryptos at the moment, or totally out?
No, I exited everything when that article was published.
So you sold everything and no regrets.
No, it's very freeing, and it feels sort of good to like. I'm glad like I didn't let reputation, um, cause me to be like hey, if I went a different direction, there's a lot of guys I came up with
Yeah,
that are like Bitcoin analysts, crypto analysts, and like doing like believe me, it's super easy to take that path, just say talking points and like don't talk about critiques, make a lot of cash or a lot of fake cash. And I was glad that I just didn't get rolled into like, yeah, that's obviously a very easy path and like it's very materially beneficial to me. But, maybe that's stupidity, maybe it's not, but I thought I had the integrity to be like, I intellectually came to a conclusion and I have to stand by it.
yeah. Like I have similar thoughts. Like I when you say fake cash, like what I think you're talking about is Tether. Like this backbone of the whole thing is Tether, and you're just like, oh, especially what's happened last week. You're just like, oh well, this is ropey. Tell like I think I'm going to stop telling other people to get involved. Like that's a word. Well, maybe just keep talking about it and seeing what it is. Like it is history. It's good to comment on these things. I don't want to ignore it. But I see what I know what you talk about with fake dollars and
like, hey, I don't want to outlaw like horse racing, but like that's how I treat it when I talk to people. It's like look, if you want to do it and like, cool, you made like 10x your money on a trade, but it's horse like it's fictitious. It's not like based on an investment thesis and
Yeah.
fundamentals and Warren Buffett ideology. It's based on um, it's based on just what is the whim of this oligarchy
Yeah.
of like crypto developers, exchange guys, and whatever other big whales that are in there. And they have a money printer at their disposal that they choose when to
Yeah.
flood exchanges and wash trade and all these different things. And believe me, it goes on. Like
Oh yeah, no, I completely know. Like
yeah,
I've done 4 or 5 episodes or videos on Tether and trying to, yeah, when you realize you're like, oh shit, this isn't good. Um, but yeah,
and that's
regulate.
the problem of it going from a currency to a settlement layer technology
Yeah,
is because like the sustainability in price and diminishment of volatility was supposed to be secured by this massive transaction layer
yeah,
of you have ordinary people constantly transacting, and that gets rid of the speculation embedded in it. But now it's like the only people using it, I mean, there's no one really using it in terms of the blockchain. It's all these centralized exchanges. The only people really using it are within the exchange system, so that they're actually trading IOUs. They're liabilities within the exchanges.
yeah.
They're not trading real
Well,
cryptocurrency.
there there are some a lot better decentralized exchanges that aren't, like on some of the other chains. Now you can argue how decentralized are they and things like that, but you like what I'll say is, it's getting better all the time and quite quickly.
Yeah,
Um,
I would say my final point on crypto is like, I don't have any problem with fintech. I have a problem if you are an obvious centralized entity that meets the Howey test, which is the security,
yeah, yeah,
and you're trying to say that you're not accountable, you're not liable to your customers, that if something goes wrong, if you steal or whatever happens, um, somehow you're immune to any like repercussions. That's
mm,
what I have a problem with. And so like, make cool technology, like
yeah,
be a company, be a payment. Stripe's a payment company. Like if they screw their customers over, their customers can sue them. They can go to court. You can resolve this. Within crypto, you can't do that because these people claim, oh, I wrote all the code, but I'm not responsible for like
yeah,
anything that happened because of it.
yeah. That's when people, the proponents will say, but the smart contracts will be able to sort all that, and there will not be, there's always smart contract risk, but it's baked in, and but yeah, there'll always be rogues, there'll always be bad actors, and that's why people need to be literate in knowing what a contract is, and it comes back to software skills.
Yeah, and this is what's interesting to like do a full circle because like smart contract and like deciding like which counterparty is made whole and like on a discrepancy. And so like going all the way back to the start of what I call financial imperialism, which is like right at the turn of the 20th century, it was occurring in South America because you had um, American and European investors investing in places like Venezuela and trying put railroads in, stuff like that. And what ends up happening, or like financing whatever agricultural product or raw material extraction. And so because of let's say a bad year because of weather or this thing or that thing, understandable events, that means the debtor cannot make the payment.
Mm.
Those creditors would say, "Oh, well, this is terrible. You need to pay us. You need to pay us now. We're going to collect the collateral. We're going to do this." And it was this discrepancy that starts the decision of, well, America comes in and says, well, obviously this is our backyard. We're the sovereign. We're going to decide who pays who, and now we're going to send a military down there, and we're going to tell the Venezuelans that they're wrong actually, and they got to pay the Europeans. And so this is where it gets down to this like, well, a smart contract isn't like truth. The smart contract is like bits of code, and like again, okay, you can't make the payment in the smart contract, but what if like you were growing cotton and you didn't grow the amount you expected, and there's like a reasonable expectation that you need to like restructure the debt. now you're in this position where the smart contract, and I would say, the people above the smart contract that are really in control of the code, um, are enabling that type of financial imperialism in a different form. And I'll say this too, like again, well, it's decentralized. Da, 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 da. We can spin a yarn about it. When Vitalik Buterin and his friends were up the stream without a paddle, when the DAO, the first smart contract that was an investment fund, when it was hacked, money was stolen, and it was going to destroy Ethereum. They rewrote Ethereum to bring that money back and put it back in the rightful wallet.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're going to do that, like that blows everything about crypto out of the water.
Yeah, and there's a few examples of that freezing money. I think one of the big ones for Bitcoin was that they didn't give the money back. Was it the Mt. Gox thing? And they said no, it has to go, because if we do that, then that, and that's why Bitcoin has this OG status of it cannot be changed and all this bullshit.
Decision at the end of the day.
Pardon?
It's a decision. It is like we saw both. Ethereum did it, so we know they could do it in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not a function of like it's gold, it's a commodity. No. It's a human monetary policy that
but again,
anytime they could change it.
Yeah, but again, it's probably still better than a lot of other places at the moment.
Yeah. Well, this is where I would say, like, the best optimal solution here is a sovereign national central bank that controls it. And when I say national, sovereign, what I'm saying is democratically accountable to the populace.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's a monopolist in some other part of the world that's like sipping pina coladas on like a tax laundering island. No. It's a policymaker. It's a elected individual that is responsible for holding the monetary system, finance, disputing of contracts and who gets paid and what is justified. Like that is all part of that sphere, and I don't want to cede that. And I don't think it's healthy for a nation to cede that totally to a foreign party that has no interest in the development and long-term success of that nation.
Yeah, and you could go down. I don't. We could talk for hours here. But we go a bit more. Like, do you listen to Balaji? I'm sure you do.
Yeah, he's blocked me. We go back and forth. I blocked him and he blocked me. And
why?
Because I kind of think he's a little bit of a charlatan, and I think he, I think through some of his expressions, we've had a few back and forths. That he knows he's kind of spewing BS, and his justification is, well, it may not be this, and this is like VC mentality. It might not be this thing, but because I'm pushing things in a direction, like one of my bets, like because like 90% of VC bets fail, 10% are the big rocket ships.
Spray and pray.
Yeah, there'll be something that comes about that then makes it all work. And it's like this self-referential logic that never can be disputed of, well, you just point out evidence that this is wrong, but like in theory, it should work. So like, I'm just going to keep investing and telling people to get into it, to do jobs, to make their careers in it. And that's what I have a problem, because I was the young guy that was like propagandized into the ideology of Silicon Valley and tech and crypto.
Yeah.
So I am a little bit, I'm a little bit, it's personal for me, because I look out and I say, like, I don't want the next young guy to be like so like energized because they're naive and they want to do something cool and this is attractive. Maybe they have, they want to make a lot of money or they want to change the world, whatever it is. And they end up getting in this thing, and then suddenly they wake up one day and they're like surrounded by like financial fraud, and they're saturated. And so I don't like that idea that then they're sort of trapped, and then a lot of people have a hard time breaking out of that identity matrix, like that I myself found myself in. I was sort of like, how can I leave crypto when I've made myself about crypto? A lot of people can't do that, and so that's where I'm
But
trying to kind of be a psychologist to like
yeah, well,
what's out there to say
like
doesn't have to be this way.
yeah, so you know, I've been in, like, when I say in, I like full time crypto for about a year and a half now, right? So I knew about, like, started looking at it around 2017 and all that shit, and then full time started a YouTube channel, got loud, because the amount there is to learn, like having knowing nothing about it, having to learn to be able to have a conversation on every single part. It took a year, and and you're still obviously still learning loads, but then I agree that you're just like, I can't just keep going further and further in this. There has to be more. This isn't, especially when you see things like the Time Wonderland rugs and the bad actors that are involved. You're like, wait a second. um I've lost, I've forgotten why I got in, and the reason you get in is because for the philosophy of what Bitcoin is, and then next thing you know, you're up all night on Twitter, into a Ponzi scheme. You're deep in it, and you're like, when's the next one? When's the next hit? And that happens with gambling. It happens with things. So it does become an addiction as well. But there's so many addictions these days with mobile phones that it probably isn't the worst one at all. By studying crypto and crypto philosophy, you get deep into the weeds of how things work and who's in charge. And the people in crypto will say, well, nobody's in charge. The code is in charge. And then when you see the code blowing up all the time, and as you're saying, well, there's only these 12 guys in charge of the code. You're like, oh, well, okay, we actually need government structures. How are government structures? Like, Bitcoin helps people wake up to all these things. What is money? A lot of people are talking about what is money now because of Bitcoin. So I think net positive is probably good. It's going to, ignite more of these kind of conversations and thinking. So I think, it's good. But I think your journey is one that more and more people will take. I'm a couple of years behind, maybe.
Well, but to be cute, I like to just, I went from Bitcoiner to MMTer. It's sort of, I'm friendly with a lot of the ideas that sort of club of people have.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is correct, is like Bitcoin was this great puzzle, like this great, like logical, like muscle training of understanding what is money, understanding how players interact.
Yeah.
And so like you could look at, well, it's decentralized, it's on the blockchain. But then there's an adjacent argument, like it's decentralized because there's the free market. And it's decentralized because, housing prices are going up because of the market. There's nothing we can do. But then, like as you said, it's like, wait a minute, there's like maybe 100 firms that I could point to. I'm doing business with half of them. They're the ones buying up the houses and causing this. Like that's the solution. We got to stop this thing. We can point to.
Yeah.
It's not a market. It's not this like thing you can't touch. It's like very tangible players in the economy. Some monopolize and some speculate, and some are parasites, frankly, that don't have the best interest of a particular. And this is exacerbated when you have sort of like foreign entities that like don't have to live there, don't have to deal with the problems. They can just like screw the country up and get their profits and then leave.
Listen, it has been a great chat. I'm looking forward to seeing how it gets recepted and that. But listen, have a good evening. We'll be in touch. Grand.
Thank you, man.
See you. Good luck.